Harvard is embroiled in a cancel culture scandal, but a little bit of a different cancel culture scandal. So students at Harvard, actually 30 Harvard student groups, signed a letter blaming Israel for Hamas's terror attacks. And we can show this letter on the screen. This letter that blames Hamas, or that blames Israel for Hamas's terrorism, is just despicable. I think we read this on the show early last week, but essentially it says, joint statement by Harvard Palestine solidarity groups on the situation in Palestine. We, the undersigned student organizations, it reads, hold the Israeli regime entirely responsible for all unfolding violence. Today's events did not occur in a vacuum. For the last 2 decades, millions of Palestinians in Gaza have been forced to live in an open-air prison. Israeli officials promise to open the gates of hell, and the massacres in Gaza have already commenced. Palestinians in Gaza have no shelters for refuge, nowhere to escape. In the coming days, Palestinians will be forced to bear the full brunt of Israel's violence. The apartheid regime is the only one to blame, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's the most despicable statement you can imagine, and yet look at how many student groups at Harvard signed this statement. 30 different student groups. 30. And now, understand that student groups at a college or university are, most of the time, the vast majority of the time, they receive funding from the university. So Harvard is responsible for these statements. Not in the sense that they should, yeah, they're responsible. There's really no two ways about it. If you give money from Harvard, then yes, Harvard bears some of the culpability if what they are funding is this gross anti-Semitism. And some businessmen, some CEOs, and some hedge fund managers are now calling on Harvard to release the names of the students who are members of these students' organizations so that they can never hire these students once they have graduated from Harvard. I'm going to read you, some of that and show you the Harvard president's response in just a second. So these 30 Harvard student groups didn't actually sign the names of the individual members that belong to these groups. And so there are several prominent businessmen who are calling for the names of these students. Bill Ackman is one. Bill Ackman is one of the most successful hedge fund managers on Wall Street, very powerful individual. Rebecca, this is element 2E. This is what he posted after these Harvard groups released this joint letter. I want to read this to you guys. If we could bring this up on the screen. This is what Bill Ackman said. He said, I've been asked by a number of CEOs if Harvard would release a list of the members of each of the Harvard organizations that have issued the letter assigning sole responsibility for Hamas's heinous acts to Israel, so as to ensure that none of us inadvertently hire any of their members. If, in fact, their members support the letter they've released, the names of the signatories should be made public so their views are publicly known. One should not be able to hide behind a corporate shield when issuing statements supporting the actions of terrorists who, we now learn, have beheaded babies, among other inconceivably despicable acts. That makes sense to me.